Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dalaran. In today's video, we'll be talking about the best spec that each class has at the arsenal that performs the best for PvP. I get this question a lot since we do so many of our duels. Everybody keeps asking me which is the best spec to engage in PvP, be it the duels that we do with 5v1s or outside of the battlegrounds, arenas, casual, or more hardcore. With all the statistical information we have for the patch 8.1, today we'll be taking a look at every single class to figure out the most popular spec that everybody is playing. Now, I am going to be talking about the specs that everybody is playing. There's a reason why people gravitate to one spec. I won't be giving you guys my personal opinions of what I think is the best spec for you to play for every class, but rather what everybody else is already playing. I will talk about the strengths of those specs and why so many people play them, be it the top tier gladiators or even casual players that like to enjoy a BG from time to time. So not to waste any more of you guys' time, let's just get into the video. When it comes to Death Knights, there's not a lot of options really. When you take a look at statistics, most people gravitate to Unholy. Be it 2v2, 3v3, RBG, Battlegrounds, no matter what you're into, most people play Unholy. The reason Unholy is the best is because it's very consistent on its damage compared to the other specs. Unholy with your pets, the damage over time playstyle, the bursty cooldowns that you have great sustained damage, a guaranteed sustained damage just from sitting on your enemy and letting your auto attacks chop them up. They're a great spec for tunneling down one target to death, which is why they're called Death Knights. They will cause death at the end of it. Death Knights are really good at tunneling a single target because of Necrotic Strike. Necrotic will take a debuff that you get, which is Festering Wound, and convert it into Necrotic Strike, which is gonna necro some of enemies' healing. So when you get the Army of the Dead summoned up, you have your pet all empowered and ready to go. You might even drop a massive abomination on top of the enemy, buff yourself up full of haste, slashing away at your enemy, and on top of it, you're suppressing whatever healing they get. It is really easy for Unholy Death Knights to score a kill just from overwhelming the enemy. Because they're a plate class, they're fairly tanky, but they also have great abilities and honor talents / normal talents that allow them to be fairly survivable. You also have pets, a variety of different pets that you can summon, which is part of the theme of the Unholy Death Knight, the fact that you control undead. The pets do a lot of different things, from annoying your enemies with zombies that will literally waddle at your enemy, stun and explode doing percentage damage, your normal pet that has a leap ability and a short stun, or Abomination, which will do massive AoE damage to anybody around them, trucking the enemy down as a powerful cooldown. But the main selling point for Unholy Death Knight, what makes him super strong in arenas, is that Necrotic Strike. Being naturally able to necrotic a certain portion of enemy's health is very powerful in World of Warcraft. Right now, most classes can utilize a trinket called the Maledict in order to necrotic a certain portion of enemy's health. Prior to that, Unholy Death Knight was the only class with a baseline feature that could do that. That still gives him a little bit of an advantage over some of the other classes and makes him especially potent within high competitive arenas. Overall, the theme for the Death Knight is really cool. Just being able to summon a literal army to your side and overwhelm the enemy is great. And in Battlegrounds, I feel very awesome to play. I'm not someone who plays Death Knight very competitively, but in BGs, just to go in, train a healer down, suppress all their healing, and really just put a dent to enemy with all the dots that you can spread, it's actually very fun and entertaining. For Paladins, we have two specs. We have the Holy and the Retribution. Holy Paladins is probably one of the second most effective and popular healers in the game. Right now for 2v2s, 3v3s, and RBGs, the only class that's better than them at healing is a Restoration Druid. Holy Paladins have many healing cooldowns, so there's many ways of dealing with different situations. So when it comes to facing against an H-Pally, you're going to be trucking into them and their team for quite a while. Paladins also have a great amount of defensive cooldowns, but also I think it helps them that they are a plate class. They are the only caster that's a healer that wears plate armor. That makes them the tankiest for physical damage, and with all the different defensive cooldowns that they offer, you also have a fairly decent way to deal with casters and magic users as well. Holy Paladins have great burst healing, as in when you need emergency heals and you need that guaranteed heal to bring someone up from low to max health, Paladins will always be there for it. H-Pallies, just like Mistweavers, can also get themselves a talent, not even an honor talent, in order to dish out some damage back to the enemy. They can snipe past the enemy, doing damage that's considerable damage, actually good damage, while healing their allies. And personally, that is something I like about a healer. When you're just getting trained by a melee, sometimes you just want to get back at them. And with the H-Pally, you can actually do that. Pop wings and start wailing with judgments. Retribution Paladins are fairly great in terms of BFA, with some caveat to it. The damage aspect for the spec is incredible. You have awesome damage during your wings, to the point where people should definitely be popping cooldowns when they see a Paladin popping off big cooldowns. Outside of burst, Paladins also have decent sustained damage, and most people say they actually have really good cleave damage for a plated class. So inside of an arena, which is a much smaller place to work with than a battleground, where enemies sometimes like to clump up, a Paladin can use that to his advantage in order to cleave through the competition. Paladins also have great amount of utility for their allies with many different blessings, be it a blessing of freedom, blessing of protection, sanctuary, you name it. I guess I should say the drawback to the Paladin, they're not really all that mobile, besides the Hand of Freedom, which can be dispelled, and the Pony that you can use from time to time in order to get a burst of mobility. Paladins are kind of fairly slow. The defensive cooldowns for Paladins are also not that great. While Shield of Vengeance can really pop enemy back with all the holy damage it can absorb, it's still only big defensive. So outside of Bubble and Bop and once in a while Shield of Vengeance, Paladins generally are the kill target in arenas. Havoc Demon Hunter is the only spec out of the two that's viable in PvP, unless you want to count Vengeance, which is a decent flag runner, but most people that are playing Demon Hunter in 2s, 3-3s, RBGs are going to want to go for damage. So while you technically can play tank Demon Hunter in order to run the flag and be fairly tanky, fairly mobile, most people end up playing Havoc. Havoc is amazing because it has great mobility. Maneuvering around a battleground or an arena happens with ease for the spec. On top of it, your cleave damage and single target damage is very powerful. Lots of abilities can cleave while doing sustain single target, so you're simply going through a rotation, and no matter the situation, you'll most likely use very similar set of abilities. You have a fair amount of crowd control for an agility class, so within stuns, AoE stuns, and incapacitation effect where you imprison an enemy, there's a lot of variety to what you already do that gives you a fair amount of competitive edge. As a class, Demon Hunters are also very unique. Havoc Demon Hunters can go for an ability through your honor talents to drain the mana of your enemies. You can also dispel yourself from any magical effects like Maledict or any of the damage over time abilities that a Warlock might put on you. If melee are overpowering, you can literally just fly up in the air to exit the situation and bombard your enemies with fell lances from above. Blizzard made sure to keep Demon Hunters fun. They were very fun and fairly easy to pick up back in Legion, and they're still more or less the same way. They're fairly easy to pick up, but also very, very fun. When it comes to Priest, we're going to start with Shadow, which is probably one of the most popular casters when it comes to 2v2, 3v3 arena brackets, because they're just that good. The Shadow Priest spread damage is incredible. Being able to put dots on more than one enemy will really rot the enemy team. The sustain of that damage is also pretty amazing, as Shadow Priest can put constant pressure on the enemy team as long as they're able to get their casts off. Finally, Shadow Priests have great amount of CC as well as great amount utility. They can dispel diseases off of their allies. They can even use Mass Dispel to remove a harmful or even immunity from an enemy or an ally, like a Cyclone for a friend or a Bubble from an enemy Paladin. They can also freely purge beneficial buffs from an enemy to clean them off of HOTS as well as other cooldowns. And with all the different crowd control between a fear, a stun if you talent into it, and a silence, they have a fair amount of flexibility in how they want to abuse that CC, whether they want to throw it on a healer to force pressure or CC one target while DPSing the other. Disciple Priest would be the viable choice and the more popular choice of the healing 2 specs that priests have. Between Holy and Disc, Disc is the one that comes out on top. Great defenses against melee teams. Even though you're a Clothy, you actually can get trained by melee a fair amount because of different passives and absorbs. For a healing class, you also bring a fair amount of CC abilities with Fear as well as Mind Control to really lock out one enemy out of the fight. Disc Priests also have great utility that they can provide for their allies, like Dark Angel in order to grant extra damage for anybody in the party for a short amount of time, and they have a decent damage output, making them a viable healer when it comes to doing as much damage as they can within 2v2 or the 3v3 environment. When it comes to druids, there are two specs that are the most popular right now, one of them being Restoration Druid. Now, I'm not a healer main for this expansion whatsoever, but I did used to play Restoration back in Cataclysm and transition into Mists of Pandaria, where Rested Druids really picked up. Currently, Restoration is probably the most popular heal among 2v2s, 3v3s, RBGs, just casual PvP, whether it's war mode, out in the world, or just random battlegrounds. And there's many reasons why that is so. With so many different interrupts in the game, you want a class that has a few insta-cast abilities where you can kind of sort of squeeze by a melee that's trying to train you down, always ready to interrupt you at a moment's notice. So Restoration Druids are pretty great for it because of so many insta-cast abilities. Most of your insta-cast abilities is healing over time, so that means you'll put a heal and it will do healing every few seconds. So overall, you are getting a lot of the value for that one heal, especially if you apply those HOTS early before an ally starts taking damage. You can get the most value and never fall behind. This healing over time effect, without being able to be directly interrupted and also being able to kind of layer a bunch of HOTS ahead of damage coming out, gives Restoration Druids a lot of flexibility with how they want to deal with damage. And an experienced Restoration Druid that knows the inner workings of the game, as well as how some of the other classes work, can predict a lot of the damage on their allies, pre-hotting them ahead of time to keep everybody safe. They also have a fair amount of crowd control between stuns, Ursol's Vortex, Typhoon, then you also have Cyclone. I mean, they have it all. And they're fairly survivable. They're pretty tanky, as they can literally jump into bear form, full of HOTS, bark skin and iron bark rolling, and feel like they're basically invincible, making them a very reliable healer for PvP. But we are going to be more talking about DPS specs in the game, and one of the ones that's more popular right now is Boomkin, slightly ahead of Feral. Don't get me wrong, Ferals are great for 1-on-1s. We have seen how well they are in duels, but when 2v2s, 3v3s and RBGs, Balanced Druids have incredible burst with Incarnation, just as deadly as that of a Feral Druid. They also are fairly tanky, allowing them to stay in Boomkin form and pump out damage while being trained by enemies. They're great for battlegrounds because of just how much spread pressure and focus burst they can follow up after getting the whole enemy team pressured. While Balanced Druids are not that great solo, and in 1v1 situations they're generally not amazing, with a reliable healer, Balanced Druid is simply just a glass cannon ready to go off. For rogues, we all know the best spec. With how many different videos I've made on rogues, we can be honest, it is going to be Assassination. Assassination has a great amount of CC, which is decent. It has all the CC you need in order to make a play. Between blind, sap, stuns, and garrote, that's really a lot to bring to the team. Also, Assassination Rogue has decent mobility with Shadow Step that does let you to get around the battlefield a little bit easier, and it also lets you deal with classes like casters and healers much easier by being able to move behind them when they're about to get a powerful cast off, or if you simply want to Shadow Step interrupt them or Shadow Step swap on them with a kidney. Assassination Rogues, out of 3 specs, also have great amount of damage for sustain, whether it is poisons and bleeds doing dot damage, but also those daggers that you're sinking, getting back-to-back envenoms onto your target. But where Assassination is really good at is its burst damage with Vendetta. Vendetta is almost a guaranteed death sentence to most enemies unless they take precautious actions. While we do have specs like Subtlety, which is great for CC and mobility, it doesn't quite have the same amount of sustained damage or burst damage as Assassination. Outlaw is another fun spec that has some decent consistency if you get the right buffs, but is definitely not as consistent as Assassination, which is why a lot of people choose to roll the powerful, the deadly Assassination Rogue. For Hunters, it was kind of hard to pick, so I am going to go with both Survival as well as Beast Mastery. With the recent updates, Beast Mastery is seeing a little bit more play in stuff like 2v2s, and in random battlegrounds, it's actually not that bad of a spec. Survival is still ahead within rated PvP, mostly in 2v2, 3v3 arena bracket. But the two specs are very similar, so it's going to be fairly easy to put them together in a single row. Survival is a great spec for PvP, mostly because of its CC. The crowd control it offers you between your Harpoon, between your Freezing Trap, Tar Trap, Knockback Trap, Pet Stun, it gives you a fair amount of crowd control to work with. Beastmaster is actually very similar in that way. It has the same amount of CC as a survival, plus or minus a few of the honor talents that modify your freezing trap. But between freezing traps, knockbacks, stuns, and a sting that can silence a healer or a caster, both of the Beastmaster and survival are fairly CC heavy. Survival has great mix of damage over time as well as physical ramping damage with Mongoose Bites. You can put a bunch of your tots and dots, you can throw grenades at the enemy, let your pet put a bleed, throw down crows at the target, and then you'll ramp up into a massive stack of Mongoose Bites to really slam down your enemy with your cooldowns. Beastmaster is very similar but in a different way. Replace the damage over time abilities for the most part with your pet damage, your pet doing majority of the auto attack damage, and it becomes very similar. It is kind of similar in the sense that both of these bursts are very rampy. Survival has a great burst overall, and so does Beastmaster when all the stars align. Survival brings a great amount of utility between your pet and the pet sack and the pet Master's Call, the defensive it can offer, as well as all the different traps you work with. The amount of utility a hunter can bring to a group is actually fairly high to be able to use their pets to defend an ally. Beastmaster have exactly the same toolkit, so in a sense they're very similar to one another. I would say the difference between Survival and Beastmaster when it comes to damage, I feel like Survival has a bit more flexibility in how you want to deal damage. Your damage over time abilities are pretty potent and powerful. Your melee damage is pretty powerful. Your pet does a fair amount of damage on its own as well. While Beastmaster on the other side is very rampy, it's almost like you have Mongoose Bite inside of your pet, and it's all about ramping that pet up and letting that pet do more and more damage. Plus, with Beastmastery, if your pet gets CC'd, most of your damage goes out of the window, while Survival can still pump numbers all by themselves. For Shamans, we have two specs that are very popular. First, we're going to start with the Restoration, as it seems just about every single healing spec is pretty good in arenas. Restoration brings totems that do a lot of things, between healing allies when they're CC'd, slowing down enemies, and doing things for you. Like, technically a Shaman can sit through a full CC chain, but as long as they threw down a healing totem as well as Earth Wall totem to absorb the damage that an ally takes, that should be good enough. So it almost lets you kind of pre-cook a lot of your defensives and utility. Speaking about utility, I think Restoration Shamans and Shamans overall is one of those classes in PvP that can bring the most amount of utility. Have you ever heard of Tremor Totem or Grounding Totem? None of the other classes have anything like this, but Shaman definitely does. I'm also a huge fan of the Restoration Shaman Mastery. The lower the health is of the ally they're trying to heal, the more potent that spell becomes. So when it comes to emergency healing an ally out of a bad situation, your Master makes almost any heal into an emergency heal. Outside of Resto, Elemental has been a very popular spec and a very potent spec when it comes to PvP. First of all, Elemental for a caster class has incredible burst damage output. And you also have great utility, just like a Restoration Shaman, with all the different totems you can bring. And outside of that, Elemental actually has probably the best mobility when it comes to kiting enemies. Being able to jump into Ghost Wolf while dropping down Grounding Totem and running away and kiting around all the melee that might chase you in a 2v2 or a 3v3 match is actually one of the advantages of what an Elemental Shaman can do. And then of course there is the Lightning Lasso, where it stuns your enemy and deals a percentage of their health, 40% to be exact. Imagine dying to an Elemental Shaman over a 5-second stun and you will barely have any health and down you go. That is never fun, but it definitely gives Shaman a competitive edge in PvP. When it comes to mages, the most popular spec by, and this is no argument here, is gonna be Fire, with Frost really close behind. I mean, honestly, all three specs of Mage are good at PvP, whether you want to enjoy Fire, Frost, or Arcane. But there is a reason why a lot of people gravitate to Fire. Fire damage have greater Pyroblast, which is basically a guaranteed one-shot. It has a fairly long cast, but you send out this massive ball of flame that travels very slowly to the enemy, and once it hits its target, it's gonna do a direct percentage of damage. Sending two of these mid-air will almost always guarantee an enemy's death when you combine the rest of your cooldowns, dropping down massive meteors and Pyroblasts at your enemy. What a lot of people like about Fire Mage is the fact that you can cast a powerful spell from a distance, so keep it away from your enemy, and if they let you just free cast forever, you can really dominate and demolish a whole team. Combustion also makes Fire Mages very great with on-demand burst. Combustion, what it does is it makes 100% crit chance for all of your spells, and a portion of that crit becomes your mastery. 100% crit means you are going to be able to combo your abilities, as most of your abilities for fire do work off of critical strikes. So for example, if one of your spells crit, it gives you a buff. That means if a second spell crit, your Pyroblast becomes insta-cast, and this way you can guarantee burst by chaining abilities that work off of crit procs, so you are guaranteeing that you're getting procs from your crits. Fire mages also have a decent amount of crowd control. While Frost would be the best spec for direct CC with all the different slows, polymorph, freezes, roots, fire mages have a decent amount of CC on their own between breath, between polymorph, between roots, and freezes. Breath is also a very effective CC for mages, as it allows them to CC more than one target. If enemies get to stack up together, you can just breath on them and combine some CC off of that. If you're able to land a breath on, let's say, a healer and a DPS, that means there's nobody there to interrupt the next target you choose to polymorph, and then afterwards there's nobody to stop you bursting on whichever target of choice you have. I feel like in a sense, the playstyle for fire mages makes it a little bit easier for newer players to try it, because of how well your abilities work off of one another. For monks, we have two specs that are very popular. First one, we have the Mistweaver, which is a mobile healer, probably one of the most mobile healers in the game. Mistweaver monks are great because of their focus healing. If they choose to focus down all the healing in one target, that target will not die no matter what you do to it. So the burst single target healing potential is probably the highest out of all the healers. Mistweaver monks are known for having great cooldowns. Between the talents that they can choose to deal with magic damage, physical damage, or other, they also have great on-demand, fairly short defensives they can provide for their allies. Mistweavers combined with the tankiness as well as the mobility also can square off for some damage with the stance of Red Crane, which is a stance that allows them to start doing damage with kicks and punches in order to heal their allies. Every time they deal damage, which is going to be increased during Red Crane, they also heal a bunch of their allies nearby. I mean, a healer that can fight back? Sign me up. Honestly, that sounds like a great idea to me. Windwalker Monk is the DPS alternative to the Monk class, and from the 5.1 duels, we know that they are fairly powerful when put in the right hands. Windwalker Monk is a great class for burst damage. When they choose to focus down on target and hit them with that touch of death, go through the full cooldowns with a Rising Sun kick into a full Fist of Fury to lock an enemy down, you should probably pop a cooldown or two, because that damage altogether is really gonna hurt. And even if a monk ends up not finishing you off in their burst rotation, their sustained damage is by far one of the better ones in the game. They can deal with melee classes as well as range classes fairly efficiently with just physical damage. To deal with range classes, monks have incredible mobility. Between your dragon kick, your rolls, tiger's lust, and being able to teleport to a nearby location gives them a lot of flexibility within arenas and battlegrounds to maneuver the field and get from target to target far easier than some of the other classes. Besides great burst damage, great sustained damage, great mobility, they also have a fair amount of defensive talents. Just like the Mistweaver, they are able to deal with magic damage as well as physical damage depending on how they choose to talent themselves. Windwalker monks are fairly effective currently in BFA, and a lot of people find themselves gravitating towards Windwalker monk because of the fun playstyle it offers. It's very similar to a demon hunter in terms of all the kicks and flips and all the karate stuff you got going on, but it's a class that still maintains a lot of its depth, especially transitioning into PvP environments. When it comes to Warlocks, I think it is no surprise that I'm gonna go with Destruction. Everybody plays a Destro Warlock if you PvP, whether you are at the high competitive arena gladiator level or simply just like messing around in battlegrounds casually. Destruction Warlocks with Chaos Bolts is like bread and butter. It just goes so well together and it does a lot of damage. Chaos Bolts is technically a bursty ability, but I would even argue that with how many Chaos Bolts they can get out and just how strong they are, it kind of amps towards the Destruction Warlock consistency. If they're able to generate a lot of resources and get Chaos Bolts back to back to back, that can be somewhat consistent in their output on any target they choose. Destruction Warlocks also have great CC chains when it comes to being able to horror your enemy into a triple fear, into a stun, into a double root. If you are saving those conflagrates for it, you can actually take an enemy completely out of the game. Hell, you can even sub one of those fears for a succubus charm, where let's say a melee is training you, you can get your succubus to CC them. They trinket it because they already have the cooldowns popped. Throw them down in a horror, drop an infernal on them, sling a chaos bolt into a stun, second chaos bolt into a root, third chaos bolt into a root. There's nothing they can do. Destruction Warlocks are also fairly tanky, so if you're a caster class that doesn't enjoy getting railed on by melee, you actually might like just how much demon armor provides for defensive nature of this class. And lastly, we have Warrior. Now, I would personally say that Fury Warrior is the more fun spec. It is the only spec in the game that ignores GCD for the most part, and it feels amazing to play. The charts technically say that Arms Warrior is the more popular spec, especially in the higher tiers of PvP. Why would Arms Warrior be that good? Well, maybe it's consistent damage, maybe it's the healing suppression through Mortal Strike, maybe it's great at focusing down one single target, which that's all true, but honestly we're gonna give it to Fury, just because it's that much more fun of a spec. The amount of mobility you can spec for Fury can be amazing. Going for double charge actually is worth, because of the synergy that Fury gets with all the different versatility, the haze that you can get in order to self-heal. Have you ever seen Catcher can duel anybody? I mean, it's amazing and it looks great. The amount of damage that Fury has, it's a bit of a ramp. It does take a bit of a while to get going, because first you gotta get the resources, then you gotta go through Rampage, and then you get Enraged. When you get Enraged, this is where you gotta keep yourself ramping as much as you can, maintaining and juggling that Enraged to really slam down damage into your enemy. And that is the glory of why Fury is amazing. It has great heal, great mobility, fairly tanky out of all the different melee classes in the game, and the amount of damage you can put out is definitely considerable. If anything, the damage is kind of sneaky. It can sneak up on you, mostly because of how Rampage functions is like 6 or 7 different hits technically, instead of one big massive hit. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Which spec would you say is the best for each one of the classes when it comes to PvP? Now, this video was mostly done with the empirical data we have of all the different popular specs that everybody is playing and why they are playing them. So this isn't my opinion or anything like that. Honestly, I probably would have said like a Frost Mage actually feels pretty great to play. I would say that Outlaw, Rogue, and Subtlety definitely have more of an equal footing with Assassination, of course depending on the comp that you're running for 2v2 or 3v3. Hell, I would say play Marksman Hunter if you want to play Battlegrounds for Hunter. So there's different things that I could have told you guys if it was my opinion based. But instead we went by numerical data. And numerical data suggests that Fury Warrior is the best spec in the game. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I do hope you enjoyed. And I'll see all of you guys in another one.